is a glorious thing. Yet our busy lives, our inability to switch off at the end of the day, and our bedtime procrastination, such as scrolling aimlessly on our phones, means that most of us aren't getting enough of it. Now, I'm sure we're all familiar with what the following day feels like when we've had a bad night's sleep. We are grumpy, we find it hard to concentrate, we might be more emotional or easily overwhelmed, and every little inconvenience becomes infuriating. And in addition, there's a huge range of negative health implications associated with sleep deprivation, including immune deficiency, inflammation, increased stress, you're more likely to be overweight, cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline. I could go on. So today's video is all about sleep. Why is it important? What happens when we sleep in terms of the different stages and their functions? And how can things like caffeine, alcohol, and napping affect the quality of our sleep? So we know that sleep deprivation is associated with a whole range of physical health implications, but here we're going to focus solely on the effects on the brain. Let's start with learning and memory. So when it comes to forming new memories, we need sleep both before learning to prepare the brain to take in new information and after learning to essentially push the save button on the memory so that we don't forget it. In a study by Matthew Walkers and colleagues, participants were randomly allocated to one of two groups. Group 1 got a full 8 hours of sleep, and Group 2 had to pull an all-nighter and not sleep at all. The next day, they all completed a test, which assessed how well they are able to learn and memorize a list of new facts. And the group that was sleep deprived did 40% worse than the group that wasn't sleep deprived. 40%. That's a fairly large percentage, and could very well be the difference between failing a test and being a star student. Next, let's look at reaction times. So research by Williamson and Fay suggests that being awake for 18 hours straight is equivalent to having a blood alcohol concentration of 0.05, which is the legal limit in relation to your reaction time, coordination, and judgment. And being awake for 24 hours straight is equivalent to a 0.1 blood alcohol concentration and results in a 50% reduction in reaction times. So driving while sleep deprived is very comparable to driving whilst drunk, which is fairly alarming. Finally, let's touch on sleep and athletic performance. Sleep is particularly important when it comes to high-level athletes, because when you're surrounded by people who are at the top of their game, anything that you can do to give yourself some sort of an edge over your competition is well worth doing. And for NBA fans out there, research by Ma and colleagues looking at elite basketball players found that extending sleep from 6.6 hours to 8.5 hours each night for a 2-month period led to a 5% increase in speed, a 9% increase in free throw percentages, and a 9.2% increase in 3-point shooting percentages, which is huge. So now that I've hopefully convinced you of the importance of sleep, let's look at how sleep actually works. So when we sleep, we go through what we call sleep cycles, which last for about 90 minutes and consist of 4 different stages of sleep. Stages 1 to 3 are stages of non-REM sleep, which get progressively deeper, and stage 4 is REM sleep, and we'll come back to what that means. First off, stage 1 of sleep is the transitional phase between being awake and being asleep. So during this stage, you'll be shifting in and out of consciousness, and your brain activity, heart rate, and breathing rate will start to slow down. If you've ever woken someone up and they've remarked, "I wasn't asleep, you fool, I was just lying there with my eyes closed," then it's likely that they were in stage 1 of sleep, where they were actually asleep, but only just. Stage 2 is another phase of light sleep, where your brain activity, heart rate, and breathing rate will continue to slow down, and the body will start to become very relaxed in preparation for the deeper stages of sleep. Stage 3 is a phase of deep sleep, which is characterized by big, slow brain waves and is a crucial time for physical recovery. This stage is all about restoring our muscles, tissues, organs, and immune system. And finally, we have stage 4, which is REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep. And it's called rapid eye movement sleep because your eyes will start to move rapidly in all different directions, even though they're closed. This is the stage associated with dreaming, and it's particularly important for mental restoration. So memory consolidation, processing what happened that day, and restoring the brain's mental capacity. So an important takeaway here is that stage 3, deep sleep, is particularly important for physical restoration, and stage 4, which is REM sleep, is particularly important for mental restoration. So as I mentioned before, our sleep is broken down into 90-minute sleep cycles, which usually follow this set sequence. So stage 1, then stage 2, then stage 3, then stage 2, then REM sleep, and then back to stage 2. And whilst the sequence stays pretty consistent, the time spent in stage 3 sleep versus REM sleep will vary across the night. In the first half of the night, you'll spend a large proportion of time in stage 3 sleep and not much time in REM sleep. But in the second half of the night, this will flip, in that you'll spend a small proportion of time in stage 3 sleep and a large amount in REM sleep. And if you have a Fitbit or a Garmin or some sort of activity sleep tracker device, you should be able to see this pattern quite clearly. So what that means is that, say for example, our usual routine is to go to bed at 10 p.m. and wake up at 6 a.m. If we were to stay up far past this usual bedtime one night, we might be physically tired and run down the next day because we'll have missed out on a lot of stage 3 sleep, which we know is important for physical recovery and occurs primarily in the early stages of sleep. On the other hand, if we wake up a lot earlier than our normal wake-up time, then we might feel mentally foggy and find it hard to concentrate the next day. And this is because we've missed out on a lot of REM sleep, which we know is important for mental recovery and occurs primarily in the later stages of sleep. Quality versus quantity. It's important to keep in mind that the quality of our sleep is just as important as the quantity of our sleep, if not more. Whilst this magic number of 8 hours of sleep is placed on the highest of pedestals, keep in mind that 8 hours of light sleep is very different to 8 hours of primarily deep sleep. And we'll go through strategies to improve both the quality and quantity of your sleep in a follow-up video. Now let's look at the effects of caffeine, alcohol, and napping on your sleep. We'll start with caffeine. So there are 2 types of people in this world. Those who can drink multiple cups of coffee throughout the afternoon and fall asleep just fine, and those who have a single cup after 12 p.m. and will be wide awake staring at the ceiling all night. And whilst it's fairly obvious that people who are highly sensitive to caffeine should limit their intake and potentially introduce a caffeine cutoff time if they want to fall asleep more easily, what about for those who can consume large amounts of caffeine and fall asleep just fine? Is there any harm in this? It turns out that caffeine can negatively affect the quality of your sleep, and that you'll spend less time in the deeper and more restorative stages of sleep. So whilst you may be able to fall asleep and stay asleep just fine with caffeine in your system, you may wake up feeling unrefreshed, which will likely result in a tendency to consume more caffeine the following day to combat this, and thus the vicious cycle will commence. And something to keep in mind is that caffeine has a quarter life of about 10 to 12 hours, meaning that if you have a cup of coffee at midday and go to bed at 10 p.m., around a quarter of that caffeine will still be in your system when you're trying to sleep. Next, let's chat about alcohol. So many people use alcohol to help with relaxation and sleep. Alcohol can inhibit certain parts of the brain, such as the prefrontal cortex, which we often refer to as the thinking part of the brain. So for highly anxious individuals with racing minds and a tendency to overthink things, they may turn to alcohol to help with essentially switching off their thoughts in order to facilitate sleep. But again, the main problem with this is that alcohol significantly disrupts the quality of your sleep. And in particular, it significantly reduces the amount of REM sleep that you'll get, meaning that you'll likely feel groggy and mentally tired the next day and find it hard to concentrate. And if you're hungover on top of that, that's not ideal. Finally, let's look at napping. Are daytime naps helpful, harmful, or somewhere in between? And the answer is, it depends on the individual. If you're able to nap during the day and sleep at night just fine, then nap away, my friends. But for those who nap and then struggle to sleep at night, that might be problematic. So to get a bit sciencey, throughout the day, a chemical called adenosine starts to accumulate in the body, which makes us feel sleepy. And the longer we're awake, the larger this buildup of adenosine will be. When we nap during the day, this reduces the adenosine buildup, meaning that we might not feel sleepy when it comes to bedtime, which will obviously make it harder for us to fall asleep. In essence, napping before bed is kind of like snacking before a meal, if you want to make that comparison. However, on the other hand, a short nap during the day can actually have a lot of restorative benefits. So it's really an individualized thing as to whether napping is helpful or harmful to you personally. If you do like to nap, it can be helpful to limit these to 20 to 30 minutes to avoid getting into the deeper stages of sleep where you'll likely wake up feeling groggy. It can also be helpful to avoid napping within around 7 hours of your bedtime so that it's less likely to adversely affect your sleep at night. All right, thanks for listening. As a quick recap, we covered 1. Why is sleep important? 2. How does sleep work? And 3. What are the effects of caffeine, alcohol, and napping on your sleep? Keep an eye out for a follow-up video on sleep strategies that you can use to improve both the quantity and the quality of your sleep.